Hello and welcome to my craft room. I'm Adrian, the freakish lemon, and I use masculine pronouns. This has some supremely weird lighting because I'm filming this at 2:45 in the afternoon, December 1st, which means the sun is already starting to set. So apologies if the light looks supremely weird throughout this intro. Welcome, if you're new here. This is basically a monthly update of my craft stuff. And if you're interested in following along with this thing that I do, consider hitting that subscribe button here on YouTube. Feel free to like, comment, share this video. It helps with the algorithm, I guess. So it is the beginning of the month. It's December 1st, which means that we need to clean up the board and sort out my plan for the month of December. So up here for my Salazar Slytherin costume, I can erase this cast-on hose bit. And those two things, the second set of dye samples and finishing the braize, are really the only goals left for that costume for the year of 2020. Christmas sweater. I'm in the process of knitting a Star Wars Christmas sweater. Part of it was done on my LK150 knitting machine. I am hand knitting the color work bits. I just gotta keep at it. The dye column is the same as it has been for the past 2 months, I think. Marigolds, which I will one day count up the weight of them so I can figure out if I have enough to dye the sweater's quantity that I'm aiming to. And also madder silk. This is for an 18th century shirt wearable mock-up thing. It's also a dye experiment. I'm much more likely to get to these dye things now during December because my big to-do project was finished yesterday, which means I can erase all of this quilt stuff off the board. The black vest mock-up gets to move to the top of the list. I remain in hope that I will finish that sometime this year, because once I have the mock-up done, I can fly through making the vest itself. I've made one before. There's just some adjustments that I need to do to get it to fit me a little better. I can take off the Christmas sweater bullet points because all of the downstairs craft room steps are complete. I've mended all the pajamas that I had in the pile, and I have a reminder to oil up my Singer sewing machine. And this, friends and enemies, is very exciting because there are no big works in progress sitting waiting to be finished. I can do whatever with the month of December. I am planning on doing a little bit of scrap quilting. I have in a plastic storage bin about a dozen of these. Most of them are longer than this. This is just the easiest one to show on camera. This is a piece of scrap batting that had to be trimmed off of a quilt at some point with little bits of fabric that have been pieced to it. I have a ton of little bits of fabric that really fit these strips and nothing else. I have no real big plans for these strips, but at some point I can use them either as a quilted fabric, if I put them together, for, say, project bags, where you might want a quilted fabric for its sturdiness, or I can sash them together, turn them into a quilt, or I can use them as the batting and backing of a future quilt. There's a lot of possibilities there. I have no deadlines for this project. This is just something that gets worked on to use up scraps when I need mindless work, or I'm coming off of a big project and I haven't figured out my next big project yet. I'm also going to add a couple of bullet points that seem a little bit weird. Sort yarn and plan weaving. I'm not going to go into the whole story. It's not my story to tell. But a friend has a significant quantity of her stash that was damaged. It's not a moth situation. There's no risk to that yarn coming to me. But they're no longer intact skeins of yarn. And during a group video call, we were discussing things that she could potentially use it for, and I mentioned weaving. So this friend offered me a bunch of skeins for weaving purposes. I believe I've received this yarn. I just haven't gone through my packages yet today, but I need to evaluate the skeins of yarn, see what lengths of yarn are still intact, and make a plan for what to do with this yarn. It will be a weaving project. The lengths of intact yarn depends on what type of weaving project it will be. I can see this taking me a long time, for one, because I don't actually know how many skeins she's sending me. She gave me some examples and I said, these ones and any others in these similar colors. But I can see that taking up a big chunk of December, especially if I get started on the weaving project, because the weaving will take me a little bit longer than normal due to potential lengths of yarn situations. I don't have any other concrete plans for to do. As always, if I start new things, I will add them to the board and we'll go over it at the end of the month. But as of right now, these things are my priorities. I know January will look very different. As the year turns over, this society places great emphasis on goals to accomplish during the new year. So I'm sure I'll have an absurd amount of bullet points on here, but we will get there when we get there. I don't want to put any extra pressure on myself at the end of this year 2020. So that's gonna do it for this intro. I will see you again at the end of the video. Hi, it's Saturday, December 5th, and I have spent a good chunk of my craft room time this week sorting out these cut yarns sent to me by my friend. It's a lot. And I've got some concrete plans, and I just wanted to share those with you real quick, because I don't know where they'll end up in the lineup on the board. I just kind of have them roughly grouped at the moment, but they're all the ones that I have planned, either going to be weaving projects or machine knit projects at this point. So let's go over those real quick. As you could see in previous clips, I first separated each skein out into different lengths. The pom-pom bucket is a lot more full than it was before because some of my things that I could potentially weave on a small loom with just didn't go with any of the plans that I had. So any of these shorter lengths will be turned into pom-poms at some point. I also, you can see my pile of tags over here. Anything that had a tag with it got a little scrap so that I could document which yarns they are for my own notes. The table is completely covered in groupings of yarn. Once I had my lengths figured out, I just dumped all of the yarns on the table and started grouping them by colors. Once I knew which lengths and which colors went well together, I could figure out what type of project I could do with these yarns. So these yarns here are my machine knitting yarns. Most of these skeins, either the whole skein or a huge chunk of the skein, was cut clean through on one side, so there are a lot of lengths that are about 2 yards long. These three are going to be a cowl together. These three are going to be a cowl together, and these two are going to be a cowl together. I don't know if I'll be changing up the cowl pattern. I'm going to start with this one, which has the most yarn that goes together, and see what that accomplishes. But these will be straight stockinette, probably striped on my LK150 knitting machine. I do have a free stockinette stitch cowl pattern that I'm going to alter a bit to sort of get that sorted out on the knitting machine. This one, this skein, except for this bit, was cut clean through one swipe, so everything is 2 yards long. And it doesn't really go with anything else in a way that I particularly like, so I'm going to try to do my machine knit hat with this yarn. My machine knit hat is knit on my Brother KH836E, which is a standard gauge knitting machine. Let me grab it. I have made 2 colorwork hats using that pattern, so I went back to my notebook and I just typed up my basic thing. If anybody's really interested, just leave a comment below. I'll share this or maybe write some directions to go with it. So I'm going to see how that works. If that works well, there are 2 other groups of yarns that could potentially become hats. These 2 groupings are going to be scrappy weaving projects. This one is going on the 24-inch loom. This one is going on the 10-inch loom. One of the tricks that I've learned to see if yarns will go together, especially for weaving, is to take a couple of scraps and twist them together to see what kind of matching or contrasting is happening with the yarns. I like how this one looks twisted together, which means I'm most likely going to like how they weave together. I did the same thing for this one for the 10-inch loom. Again, you can see that these yarns go nicely together when twisted up in these little scraps. I am supplementing this grouping with this stroll fingering in black and this Wool of the Andes Sport in 25299, which I believe is the Aurora Heather colorway, simply because these yarns go well together nicely, but this green contrast was going to look really good, and there wasn't a whole lot of dark colors that I could use as a contrast for this grouping of yarn, so I'm using some of my own leftovers for the warp for this. These 3 skeins I think will weave up really interestingly on my 10-inch loom, but they don't have warp yarns yet. On my 10-inch loom, usually I use most of a skein for the warp and most of a skein for the weft, so I just need 100-gram skein or the equivalent of other yarns to go with each of these yarns. I'm going to order a deep blue for this one because I think that would do best for this yarn. And I'm waiting to hear back if my sister has any scraps that will be a good warp for either of these 2. Figured I'd ask before I order anything else. But based on experience and other yarns that I've woven, these kind of concentrated speckles or pops of color or 1/4 to 1/3 of the skein in a contrast usually weave up really interestingly. These 2 skeins don't have a set plan yet. If the hat works out well, these could also become hats. This was another skein that was cut clean through, so all the lengths are 2 yards each. This one was mostly cut clean through, but there are some longer pieces. These little mini skeins could be used as a warp or just knit for longer than a single strand. Still gotta figure that out. So, update with this machine knit cowl situation. The plan was originally to do 3 cowls, but I'm liking the yarn held double more, which means I'm basically just gonna combine the 3 cowls that I'd planned on doing into one cowl thing. Also, I finished the vest mock-up, wore it a bit yesterday, and I'm wearing it all day today to see if I need to make any other changes based on my actual movement. I don't know what this wing is doing, but it's the end of the month, so let's see how I did on the board. So starting from the top, Salazar Slytherin. Samples were not done. By the time I got this table situation sorted out and all the to-dos able to be put away to do dyeing, it was too close to Christmas to really get started. We have 2 Christmas trees in this house, one in the living room and one in this room, and I didn't want to leave a big mess over here for Christmas, so I just didn't get any of that done. Optimistically, I was planning to do it between Christmas and New Year's, but I've been a slug, so that has not happened. The brays are not yet crossed off. They are nearly done. They're practically done, but they're not quite there yet. I did manage to get the 2 lucite cords for my shirt done. These are the lucite cording for the cuffs of the shirt. Both of those are done. That shirt is now officially 100% complete, and unless something goes terribly wrong, I won't be doing anything else to it. Huzzah. Obviously, dye stuff has not changed because of the aforementioned table and Christmas situation. The to-do column looks very exciting. So let's start from the top. Black vest mock-up. Finally done. In fact, I did 2 of them. This is my bag of mock-up nonsense. I think this actually has the original mock-up I did in it too. Perhaps? I don't know, and I'm not going to open it to find out. But I assembled the mock-up that I had cut and has been sitting in this room for literal months. This is the mock-up that I tried the interlining with the canvas in. I liked how that stiffening layer worked on the fronts, but I had to do more tweaks. I made the adjustments to the darts, traced it out on paper. Well, I mean, I cut it apart, traced them out on paper, cut a second mock-up of just a muslin layer, assembled that real quick, tried it on, worked great. So that item is officially off the list. It only took me most of a year to do. Going down from there, I did oil my Singer sewing machine. I also oiled the... what is this? I also oiled the Janome while I was at it. I did a thorough clean of my Singer sewing machine, although I may look into getting those, like, tiny nozzle vacuum attachments because, whoo boy, the amount of fuzz in my Singer sewing machine after quilting. It is frightening the amount of fuzz that you can pull out of there after a single quilt project. Scrap quilting. I did do some scrap quilting. So I have about 6 new strips. As you saw in the footage, I just take a piece of scrap batting, sew down 1 piece of fabric, and then chain along until I get to the end, and then I trim them down so that they're even. Oh, that's fluff in my nose. That's a decent amount between projects, and I was starting to get bored with it, so they will go up in my storage bin with the others. As you can see, I've moved on to other projects now. Sort yarn, plan weaving. I did have a clip for that during the montage, but it was one of those things that I kind of had to get done right away while that yarn came in, because otherwise it was never going to happen, and that's just stress we don't need. Just to quickly reiterate, I planned out a bunch of projects and then ended up changing the project when I started working on the machine knit cowl because of how I ended up doing it, so the majority of the yarn is going into that project, which feels good. I'll talk more about it in a second. Warp, the 10-inch loom, and the 24-inch loom. The 10-inch loom warp hasn't been crossed off. Part of the reason is because one of the yarns that I'm using for the warp in that project is leftovers from this sweater. So, which I've just now realized I completely skipped past in the first column. I finished my Christmas sweater. I finished it Christmas Eve. It has not been blocked. It's full of dog hair. I will put the name of the sweater pattern on the screen because I don't have it in front of me. The original design is in gray and black. Mine is in Christmas colors. This is Knit Picks, Wool of the Andes in Hollyberry, Dove Heather, and Aurora Heather. The body and sleeves below the color work was knit on my LK150 knitting machine. I believe it was dial tension 3. I did have to do some fussing with the pattern to get the numbers to work for the size that I wanted. I knit the cuffs by hand. I knit the color work by hand. I'm very pleased with it, and I love wearing it. Why are you honking? I've basically been wearing it non-stop since I finished it, because Star Wars Christmas things hold a very special place in my heart. I don't know why, but something about R2-D2 wearing a Santa hat just speaks to me. But back to the weaving. I didn't warp the 10-inch loom. Also, it's kind of holding things at the moment. I did, however, warp the 24-inch loom, which was an adventure. There were some cut yarns that were long enough to do the length warp that I wanted, but a lot more that weren't. So I ended up diving into my scrap stash and just picking stuff that looked like it might go and hoping for the best. Weaving has slowed down a little bit on that because I predictably overdid it one day and my wrist was not happy about it. Story of my life. So right below that was masks. I needed to whip up a couple more general use masks. People get weird about you wearing Halloween masks at Christmas time. Also, I think I lost a mask somewhere. Probably somewhere waiting to be laundered, but haven't found it. So I figured a few more just general use ones on hand would not go amiss. Oil Janome. As I said, took care of that when I was oiling the Singer. Cowl. That's a great descriptor. We'll fix that for January's video. This is the machine knit cowl that I'm making out of the yarns that my friend sent me. This is being done on my LK150 knitting machine because there was no way I was dealing with those ends by hand. It's a very simple cowl. It's based off of a pattern that I will put here because I don't recall what it is. I mean, I can tell you it's basically cast on a number of stitches, knit a number of rows, seam them together into a loop, infinity scarf style. But because there are so many ends in this project, I about doubled the width of it so that I can sew it into a tube and then graft the ends together, therefore hiding the horrific amount of ends and knots in this cowl. So that's going steadily. I'm about 2/3 of the way through the row count that the pattern uses. I may just keep going until I use up as much of this yarn as is physically possible. I am holding the yarn double to make more of a solid fabric so you can't see the horrendous forest of ends, and I'm using dial tension 4 on the LK150. The black vest. You can tell I was getting lazy with writing out my tasks on the board, as it's abbreviated to BV. So I finalized the new pattern, cut out my pattern out of my new tracing, did my second mock-up, and then there's a bunch of tasks here, so let me list them all and tell you how it went. Cut the interlining, cut lining, cut fashion fabric, basted fronts, and thread mark. There's a small plane flying overhead and it's very loud. So here's the order of operations. I cut out a thin muslin interlining and canvas interlining for the fronts and these pockets, which handily gives me a piece that I can show you without dragging up a whole front of this vest. I then basted these two layers together. You can see here it's a simple outline because it's a small pocket, but for the fronts I wanted to baste on either side of each dart, around the edges, and kind of across the chest area so that those layers did not shift away from each other. I then cut the same muslin as an interlining for the back pieces and for the fasteners at the back. There's fasteners at the small of the back that go through a buckle. I cut interlining pieces for those so that the way that the fashion fabric moves wouldn't be terribly different from the fronts. I then cut out the fashion fabric, which is this black linen. I'm not entirely sure if it's a 100% linen. It may be a linen rayon blend. I bought 3 yards of it at Joann's with coupons one day, and then sadly one of our Joann's in 2019 closed. This is very sad because it was the biggest one in my immediate area. But they had more of that same fabric. I just bought the rest of the bolt. 3 to 4 yards, somewhere in that range. So my idea was to make a vest and also a pair of trousers to go with it. So I laid out my interlinings on the fashion fabric, pinned them together, and cut them out. And I did it in such a way that I could cut out a second vest. I have just literally dropped all of the pocket pieces, so give me a second. These ones are only pinned to the pattern pieces. It's a lot more precarious moving this pile around. For that second vest, there is some creative pattern laying going on. Basically, I had room to do the two fronts on grain, and I had to do the back pieces cross grain. But as that's going to be a much more casual vest without any stiffened interlining, that's another plane. As this is going to be a much more casual vest without the stiffened interlining, I figured it wouldn't make that much of a difference to have the back cut on the cross grain. I was only able to do this because the linen fabric is a very wide cut of fabric from Joann's. So now I have to, for my own peace of mind, baste the muslin layer to the fashion layer on this vest. I have one front where that's been done. The others I gotta go ahead and do that. I also need to cut the lining fabric for these. I'm going to do the linings in two different ways, just because it's fun to do things differently, I guess. I'm going to do the lining for the stiffened vest pretty much how the original pattern tells you to. I have to go back and read the directions in the actual pattern. They have a bag lining method where you sew the right sides together and turn it inside out, but the armholes in the vest confused me, so I need to revisit that. I may just turn in the seam allowance and whip stitch it in, as was done historically for a lot of linings. I just need to sort out how to do the curves in the armholes if I'm going to do it that way. I don't know. I'll figure it out. The more casual vest I'm going to flatline, so I'll put the wrong sides of the black linen, there's no wrong side, but the back side of the black linen to the wrong side of the lining fabric, sort of baste them together and treat them as one piece of fabric. I'll then cover any interior edges with a seam tape or turn them under and whip stitch them down. I haven't decided yet. I'm kind of playing it by ear with this vest because why not? It's a bonus. My hope is that I'll have enough of this Halloween bat fabric to line both vests. So that's the list for now. Nothing from future projects has moved over, but I'm very excited for the possibility of some of that stuff moving over in the new year. Speaking of the new year, I wanted to just take this moment to go over how my 2020 making goals actually went. I may have talked about these goals at the beginning of 2020, but I have no recollection of doing anything prior to April. That's too far back in the memory banks. That file is no longer compatible. But I know I've talked about them in bits and pieces on this channel throughout the year. So let's just go over the goals I had for 2020 and how I did. So the first thing on my list was a series of makes with deadlines. The top of that list was 2 items of clothing deadline for March 13th, my sister Gabby's wedding. I made a vest and a button-down shirt for that wedding. Thankfully, I did in fact get both done. I also had a making goal deadline for the New York Sheep and Wool Festival in Rhinebeck, New York in mid-October. That ended up being cancelled in person, but I still wanted to finish that sweater for the deadline. So that was the City Limits sweater by Samantha Guerin Designs, and I did in fact finish that the week before the event was supposed to take place. Also by Christmas, I wanted to finish this sweater, and I did it. And by the end of the year, I wanted to be somewhere between 2/3 to done on my Cozy Memories blanket. As of this filming, I have not in fact counted up the squares to determine the exact percentage I'm at, but I will add those numbers here to the screen for you. I had 3 works in progress from 2019 that I wanted to get done in 2020. The first was the Redford sweater, which I did complete. The second was a set of pinwheel scrap blanket squares to use as seat covers in my car. I finished and seamed 4 of these squares together and then changed my plan. So I have it crossed off because I'm done with that pinwheel scrap pattern for this idea, although technically it is still a work in progress. But it's not an active work in progress at this time. The third item is my Halloween rice field shawl. I did bind that off in the fall, around the same time as the City Limits sweater, so that is done. We can cross it off. For my Salazar Slytherin costume, I had 4 points on my list. The shirt, the braise, cast on the hose, and do the sampling. I finished the shirt, I cast on the hose. The braids are nearly done. I still have some dye sampling to do, but I finished the card weaving sampling to determine which patterns I'm likely to pick, and I finished the loom weaving sampling to determine what I was actually weaving the tunic out of. So most of the big decision points have been made. So that's been crossed off, that is considered done. I then had a list of one-off projects that I wanted to incorporate into the year's making. A gradient houndstooth weave, which I did complete. It's actually right here. I do have plans to make this as a very casual square construction vest. I just haven't done it because I've been focusing on other things. But I'm looking forward to doing it soon. I wanted to do 1 hat by knitting machine. Done. 1 garment by knitting machine. I actually ended up doing 2. Anything extra that I get done is like bonus points in my brain, so huzzah. 1 hat knit by hand. Didn't do it. I have the yarn picked out, but it didn't get done. A 1 skein shawl. Again, didn't get done. Probably because I procrastinated on that rice field shawl for basically the whole year. Cast on another hand knit sweater. Did not do that. When I made this list, my brain didn't consider the Christmas sweater to be in the hand knit category, but with the City Limits sweater and the hand knitting on this sweater, I mean, it was basically a sweater and a half. My plan was a little off there, so I'm not mad that I didn't cast on another hand knit sweater. And then choose a pattern for my brown Cormo handspun. I finished this handspun last year. It took me a very long time to do because it was very boring. As the name suggests, it's brown Cormo wool. I did a traditional 3-ply yarn. I've picked a cable pattern that I think will fit that yarn nicely, and there's definitely plans to make it in 2021. And that was it for my concrete 2020 making goals. I was at a point where I was shifting between fiber crafting and sewing a lot, and I wasn't sure what the year was going to look like in terms of things to make. So I think a list like this, where I have very specific things that I want to make for specific times, and a general view of things that I would like to get done throughout the year, is a good way for me to structure a kind of plan so that I'm not just floundering around trying to do everything. I'll talk about my 2021 plans in the next video. So that's really going to do it for the month of December. Hope you guys enjoyed this different year of video making. If you want to follow along with this thing that I'm doing, consider hitting that subscribe button. Like, comment, share, do the thing. If you want to do the thing, algorithm is happy when you do that. You know what, if you feel like commenting, comment below with a thing that you're proud of achieving this year. It doesn't have to be a big thing. It really doesn't. Getting through the day. That's an achievement. You know, pick one thing that you can applaud yourself for. Comment down below if you've got the, the inclination to comment. I know not all of us do. It happens. So that's gonna do it for December. I've probably already said that. Goodbye.